Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Marbella Muro, and I'm welcoming you to the first Artist Lab of 2021. This is Artist Lab in the Studio series, a virtual program that we started last year in order to support and promote artists of color and to seek and to maintain the creative community connected. We begin by acknowledging that Self-Help Graphics resides in Apachagna, currently known as the Los Angeles neighborhood of Boyle Heights, where the original peoples of this territory, the Tongva, Chumash, and the Tataviam were first displaced. And tonight I'm excited to bring in three artists who are featured in our current exhibition, Intersections. It's a virtual exhibition that we launched last year. You can visit our website to see the full exhibition and the individual works. The three artists are MFA graduates whose thesis exhibits were canceled, altered, or postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Álvaro Márquez graduated from Cal State Long Beach. William Camargo and Jonah, Jonah Elijah graduated from Claremont College. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marbella.
Well, we're going to first begin before we go on to talk about intersections. I like to just do a quick check-in that we usually start with. I mean, there's so much, and this exhibition really touches upon the many series of events that happened last year with the Black Lives Matter and the effects of the people of people of color. So I just wanted to check in with everyone thinking about last year and most definitely these events that happened last week. Well, would anyone like to start?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot. There's, I think, at least I think a lot of my close friends and folks that I always, hang around with is, we weren't surprised of the many things, the police shootings, the kind of, trying to overthrow the government through this like white supremacist idea that the election was fraud. And even just kind of the exacerbating of events with COVID-19, like, who is this pandemic really affecting, and Black, brown neighborhoods, of color, indigenous communities have really kind of, have had so much of that impact, like because of these kind of injustices and inequities in our neighborhoods. I mean, just yesterday, I think I saw that, I used to live in Chicago, and I saw the data from Chicago that people that were receiving the vaccine were not even from those impacted communities. My mom and my father are quote unquote essential workers, and my dad works at a retirement center. He hasn't gotten the vaccine. My mother hasn't gotten the vaccine, and I think we see this continuation with it, and I think it's going to continue with even with Joe Biden. I think we have to kind of keep fighting. We shouldn't stop, and we never stopped as well beforehand. And I think one way I kind of deal with that is through making art and through providing for folks that don't have the resources as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, like William said, I think this last year has kind of laid bare the failures of the state, the failures of capitalism, the failures of a lot of the structures that we live under. And I agree with William. It's really no surprise. I think there's this exasperated call for things to go back to normal. But I think for marginalized communities, that normal is already deadly and toxic, right? So I think for me, 2020 has gotten me to really think with more intention about the sort of world we want to create. It's not that I wasn't politicized before, but I think 2020 was this catalyst point where so many of the issues that have been bubbling up, at least in my lifetime, I was born in the 80s. I was born under Reagan, I was born under sort of trickle down economics, and this is something that I've witnessed already for almost 4 decades now. So I think if anything, it's really highlighted to me the importance of this intercultural solidarity, right? And that's kind of the impulse behind this show, sort of what does Black and Brown solidarity look like? And how do we acknowledge Indigenous erasure? These are all these issues that the current and outgoing political regime has expressed disdain about, right? Like the sort of classes that I teach as a history instructor are un-American according to the orange garbage bag. So and I also think it's important not to rest on our laurels, right? Like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris represent maybe this change from the Trump regime, but it's still a neoliberal agenda. And so we can't rest on our laurels and think, okay, number 45 is out, things are going to go back to normal. That normal was already deadly. That normal was already dysfunctional, right? So I think that if we fall into that complacency, we miss this opportunity to actually to build on really radical possibilities.
I agree. I agree with William and Álvaro. I think honestly, this whole year just allowed us to see like what's really going on, and like we can really use this as a time to like really unite amongst us Black and Brown people. We can I think it really just allowed us to see what's really going on. I think the Band-Aid was really taking off, and now it's like, how can we like take advantage of this time and use this time to unite?
I'm gonna direct it to the titled intersections. You were talking about this already, Álvaro. So taking from your curatorial statement, the term intersection speaks to the intersections of race, class, and gender in the construction of socio-political realities, but also alludes to the ways that urban environments have been shaped by processes of development that render vulnerable to the most marginalized in society. And here in this context, and it's clear through the work by the three of you, you engage in sustained conversations about ways in which Black and Brown communities can foster solidarity in the struggle against the effects of racial capitalism and the ways in which these shapes our daily lives. Can you, I know for the three of you, all of your work has dealt with your personal experiences, your community experiences, and even ancestral experiences. I'm going to speak, we'll start first with Álvaro. If you can talk about how this idea, so to start, sorry, to backtrack, I invited you to, since I've known you and we've had a relationship, a working relationship already, I invited you to be part of this, to do something or host your exhibition because I knew it had been canceled. Mm-hmm. And then, so when we talked about this exhibition, I was like, okay, you shouldn't, let's bring other people, but that have also did not get the opportunity to have this thesis exhibition. And so then you connected with William, and then William connected with Jonah. So thinking about how you put all of these together, can you talk about how you, how intersections came about, and then also linking it back to your own work, which you've been dealing with regards to displacement and to displacement.
Sure. So I mean, the idea came about, thanks to your invitation to show my thesis exhibit, which was canceled because of COVID. And I think that there's often this individualist impulse in the art world where individual people want to get all the attention and say, it's all about me. It's look how talented I am. Look what I can do. And I thought it was much more interesting to actually create a collaborative exhibit where it's like, if I'm being given the privilege of having this exhibition space, I know that there's a lot of other MFA students that were affected by this. And I thought it would be an important opportunity to work collaboratively, which is something that I really appreciate doing. Because again, it goes against this individualist impulse in Western society to worry about ourselves. And I thought, how can I work with other people, but it's also a chance to learn, right? And I had been following William's work for a while back. We had been in touch because I was supposed to give a visiting artist lecture at Claremont Graduate University, but it was postponed because of COVID. And so that's when William and I started to get in touch. And I saw there was a lot of overlap in his subject matter and mine. Even though we have very different approaches, he uses photography and performance, I realized that we were kind of in conversation with one another. And I thought that it would make for this opportunity to tackle this subject through multiple approaches, which I think makes for a much more dynamic show. And me personally, I'm not originally from Los Angeles. I've been here for 12 years. I moved here in 2008. And so in many ways, I've seen the gentrification process in Los Angeles since I moved here. And it's something that I've tried to address in my work since at least, I want to say 2012, when I made a print with self-help graphics on the LA River. At the time, I was living in Highland Park before it became hyper gentrified. I got there when it was still primarily a brown working class community. And I saw how gentrification ravaged the community. I saw my neighbor, who was a single mother with 4 kids, who was able to rent this big house for her entire family. I saw her get kicked out and get replaced by this hipster couple with a fancy Tesla. And I remember seeing the storefronts disappear from having mom and pop shops, knowing the local lady who had her own juice spot get replaced by a boutique donut shop that sells $5 donuts. And I saw this radical change. And in the midst of this change, I saw a growing number of unhoused people on the streets. And as I would come and go off of the 110 freeway, there was an encampment of unhoused people living by the freeway. And it was a small town. There was at least 20 tents. And I had these mixed feelings about it. I felt on the one hand, as somebody who wasn't from Los Angeles, that I was implicated in this gentrification process. Because even though I come from a working poor background and my parents, they're janitors, I have a certain amount of privilege with my education. And so it was then that I started to really think about, how am I implicated in this? But as somebody who has a history background, and who likes to read historical works, I thought, what is the deeper historical context to this, right? Displacement didn't just start with unhoused people. It's an ongoing process. As a historian, I think of Los Angeles being shaped by multiple regimes of displacement. You have this arrival of the Spanish, which displaced indigenous Tongva people and Angjachemen and Tatiavan people. And then you have the Yankee incursion post-1849, which displaced the Mexican nationalists, right? And even the Mexican national period was premised on indigenous erasure. And then you get the boosterism of the 1950s, where they're promoting this California lifestyle, and it's bringing all of these people from the Midwest, from the East Coast. Then you have, deindustrialization in the 1970s, which pushes out communities. You have redlining in the 1920s, which restricted, Black residents to certain parts of the city. It's really a microcosm of California history. And so the deeper I went into this question of displacement, I realized it's an ongoing process endemic to capitalism and rooted in the colonial venture, right? Even the very idea of private property is something that was completely anathema to indigenous people. People didn't own the land. You lived in reciprocity with it. You took care of it. It took care of you. And there was this relationship of land stewardship. So the more I thought about it, I thought, all of these things are connected. So my work in the show is really trying to draw these connections through a multidisciplinary approach. And I'm really grateful that William put us in touch with Jonah, because I think the three of us tackle these issues through very distinct lenses, but they cohere in a really clear way, I think.
I'm going to share the my screen to share the exhibition, but before that, so I see how you met with William. And William, were you both colleagues with Jonah going to school at the same time?
Yeah, no, we were. I think when we first, in our first orientation at school, I was like, in institutions, right? There's probably especially then again in private institutions and places like Claremont, Um, you know, one of the first persons I talked to was Jonah. It just, like, oh, you're in the program. We ended up in being like pretty close to each other in the studios, and having these like everyday conversations of the hood I grew up in, and Jonah, talking about Houston, and those kind of like those two lifestyles intersecting, right? And just how things have changed too. I kind of approach my work through this kind of very hyper localized historical praxis where I dig history. I also question, when I came back from living in the Midwest for a couple of years, like where's that brown history um, that I knew that I had to dig up to find who were the people that were packing the oranges in Orange County, who were the people picking the oranges, uh, and kind of trying to centralize that and show that to folks, and using my own body to kind of negotiate these spaces that I was kind of encountering, these histories. It was pretty eye opening, but also, um, I felt that I was, not given the opportunity to see those histories, and to realize that, um, there's a lot of work and labor that gets erased from cities, from the histories of cities.
Because they're
And
hidden
they're
under the carpet, so we don't
exactly,
see.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we see who were the folks cleaning up after, at the Capitol, right? Black, brown folks, cleaning up after all that mess that the white supremacists made. And that labor is always going to be a continuation of erasure and displacement, and of course, living right next to Disneyland is a huge kind of the subject in my work. I mean, I don't photograph in Disneyland because I never went there. Like, folks think that if you're from Anaheim, that you kind of get some kind of like city pass. Like, I went as 18-year-old for grad night because it was cheap. I got drunk, I partied, and that was the only experience that I had with Disneyland, because right, you know my parents are gonna pay like $20 to park, plus the like almost $100 tickets per child.
Yeah.
My sister went as a child, but because my parents had to save, and they didn't tell my brother and I, because they said they can only afford to take my sister at the time.
Yeah.
And we see the implication of this kind of like wage gap between the workers there, and folks that work there can't really
Yeah.
live in the city, and
And
we
I
have a
have to,
huge.
yeah, I have to say that I think a lot of people, including myself, that like I think when you have kids, you have like this um, maybe feeling with Disneyland when you grew up here in Southern California, like, oh my God, I have to save and take my kid at least once. I don't know, because everybody does it.
Mhm,
Yeah, there's this like pressure of it into some capacity. And then there's always that conflict, like, no, that it's the conflict of like when you grew up going or once or being around it and being
mhm,
bombarded by the imagery. And yeah, I think that there is this like unknown or unsaid thing that really causes like, oh my God, I need to take, I really need to make that effort to take my child
mhm.
to Disneyland. It's odd. Yeah. Jonah, when you came to self-help, and we were in the gallery for a while, and we were looking at all of your work, and we were trying to like lay out how working on laying out the show, and I don't know if it feels like it hadn't dawned on you of, or like really hit you of, shit, that my work is this, and how we a lot of Jonah's work if is about his personal experiences and memory, uh and then thinking about displacement. I'm like, what is that work in the back of the truck? And he's like, oh, it's about displacement. I'm like, well, get it out. Yeah, and it was interesting that you I mean, you had this thesis show, and then you brought a lot of different works into the exhibition, and I know that, but like, maybe it's because you've just been living it and you moved from one state to another, that you're still processing it and it didn't really label it as displacement. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. And honestly, what happens with me, I just figured this out. I was thinking about it today, and I was like, the whole time I was talking with you about the works, I was actually figuring out, oh, this is what it's about. I'm like so caught up in the work that I'm like, I have my ideas, but I don't know what exactly it's about. And when I was talking with you, it was kind of like therapy. I was like, oh, so this is why I'm doing this and this,
I'll
because
be
I feel like,
charging soon.
yeah, kind of like my therapy. But I mean, but the work is, yeah, it is a reflection of like my past, and it's kind of embracing those Black experiences. And just, I mean, recently not figuring out it's about displacement, but that was the center like idea of it all. And it was trying to figure out how can I tie those ideas in with my work.
Yeah. So we're going to look at what we're talking about. Let me see. Let me share this screen. Okay. Is it large
Yeah.
and big? It comes through.
Yeah.
All right. So for everyone out there, our website, selfhelpgraphics.com, the exhibition intersections on here. And so we'll start with Álvaro. Or actually, let me just go through the gallery first. These are a few installation shots of everyone's work.
People can click on
I'm sorry?
so people can click on the price list so you guys can purchase the work.
Yes, yes. And click here, everyone, arrow here. Click here to view price list. I haven't been to the building for a while, so I'm getting a little nostalgic here. This is Álvaro's work, details, and then we'll go into the individual works. William, and this is the work I was talking about, Jonah's work that was still in the truck.
Yeah, I had to pull it out. It was perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to start, Álvaro, to talk about your maps first.
Sure.
And then I'm going to end with your altar.
Okay.
So you've been I've been saying that you've been working a lot on with maps, and I'll go back down for the details later.
Mm-hmm.
But can you walk us through these maps and how maps have become very important in your work?
Yeah, well, these particular maps, I'm a history nerd. I'm trained as a historian, and I really like going into archives. And my approach to making art is that I do all of the archival research and reading that perhaps an academic would do. But rather than writing an essay, I work to produce a body of work around these themes. And these particular maps are hand embroidered. You kind of don't see it in the details. And they're highlighting basically, there are different phases in the privatization of land in the Los Angeles, in what we now call the Los Angeles Basin. And they're from 4 different periods in time. The first map is from 1769, which is the moment of the Portola expedition, which was when the Spaniards first, quote unquote, discovered and charted this area. And the second map is actually a map of the different ranchos during the Spanish colonial period. And I'm drawing this contrast between the map on the left, which just shows indigenous villages at the time of the Portola expedition, and it shows how widespread these settlements were, right? This was not a blank slate, as white supremacists want to believe, that they brought civilization, there was nobody here. There was a thriving network of populations, but their land was taken away from them. Their cultural practices, their language, their identity was stripped of them, and they were forced through violence to convert to Catholicism. And those who resisted were basically faced with the genocide. The second map you see then shows those original Spanish land grants circa 1820, 1830. And I hand embroidered the lines created by the ranchos to show the enclosure of this once communal land, right? And so I'm trying to highlight the process of the privatization of land and playing up the shapes created by these social policies. So by the time you get to the third map, that map is a homeowners loan corporation map from 1929, if I'm correct, or 1927. And it basically shows redlining in Los Angeles. And all the areas in red were areas that were deemed undesirable. So essentially, if you were Black or if you were brown in Los Angeles in 1927, these are the only areas you were even able to buy property. So it shows the creation of these racial geographies through public policies, through capitalist development patterns, so that by the time you get to the last map, the fourth map, it's actually a map of gentrification patterns in Los Angeles from the year 2000 to 2015, and it comes from the Urban Displacement Project at UCLA. And so I wanted to put these four maps in conversation, again, as a historian, to play with this question of teleology, right? Which is this idea that one thing happens, then another, then another. But the installation elements around it kind of play with that teleology. It challenges that linear notion of, that Western linear notion of time, right? To show that through time, there's these connections that link all of these eras together. And in my own work, when I was a graduate student before art school, I took a lot of classes from radical geographers. These were Marxist geographers who really got me thinking about the social construction of space and its relationship to race and class and gender. And the more I went into the history of maps, I realized that printmaking as a medium was really tied in with this colonial venture. You know, Christopher Columbus, when he went back to Europe after his first trip out here, he published a book, and in that book, they use woodcut illustrations to illustrate the book. And the development of printing technologies facilitated the creation of maps. And maps were a very Western Eurocentric epistemology of understanding how to manage and control land, right? It's not a politically neutral device. Mm. Maps can have radical uses, but they have a root in Eurocentric epistemologies of how to envision land as something to be controlled and managed, how to manage populations. And so I thought it was interesting as a printmaker to dive into this history of maps with the medium that is in conversation with this history, that's complicit with this history. For me, I thought it's really interesting that the first press in the Americas was brought to Mexico City during the colonial period. So even my own history as a Chicanx person is enmeshed with the history of printmaking in a way. Mm-hmm. And so by looking at maps, I'm really looking at understanding how we conceive of land as this resource, as a commodity, right? Because even the Homeowners Loan Corporation map, that's a map that was used by real estate agents and by banks to dictate who could buy a property where. So I'm really making the case that maps are not neutral devices. They're politically charged. They have a particular history, and they serve a particular function in society. I know now it's been normalized. We have Google Maps, we have access to all this information, and that's great. But that has a history that goes back, that is rooted in violence and white supremacy in many ways.
And you, it's a little difficult to see, I know, but you can see here that you also incorporate prints. Yes. into this work. So all of these are lino cuts, correct? Correct.
They're all, it's different. I think of them as iconographic placeholders. So to me, an iconographic image carries more meaning than is at first evident, right? So they all reference different issues, political periods,
Yes.
particular issues that connect all of these maps together, whether it's a Spanish galleon, a police car, the San Gabriel mission, a covered wagon, an indigenous key. It's really a way of articulating this connection across time and across space to think beyond simple historical narratives.
And then from here, we'll go to your second work, that is second installation that you put together. Just going back, the geometries of displacement, that's the work that you created for your thesis, correct?
Correct.
And then the Los Angeles real estate landscape, was that part of your thesis, or it developed as
it's something that I worked on as I was working on my thesis as an experiment, but when it came time to articulating my thesis exhibit, I curated it out because it kind of stood out. But when I got the chance to install here at Self Help, I realized that I wanted to incorporate in there specifically because, you know, this piece, Los Angeles real estate landscape, is really thinking about the enclosure of private property or land as private property, but really it's about the relationship between policing and two paradoxical things, right? The invisibility of unhoused people, but the hyper visibility of the objects they use to survive hostile environments. So the tent, I didn't want to glorify a tent, right? Like I played with this image a lot because I think the tent in Los Angeles now is ubiquitous, right? If you go downtown, you can't escape these tents. And it's become a symbol of this broken system where marginalized people are not granted that human decency of a dwelling, right? They end up having to
you
use.
don't have to go into downtown. The numbers are just exasperated, especially during COVID.
Yeah, it's really troubling to see the growth of people living in tents. Even if you go to Echo Park, right? There's a whole encampment there, and it's great. People are using this public space in a way that I think speaks to these inequities. But I didn't want to glorify. I didn't want to just create this art object like, oh, here's a pretty tent. I wanted to put it in context, right? So you have the shopping carts on the four poles of this installation, but then you have different iterations of LAPD vehicles to show, again, how it is that through the creation of this thing that we call land as private property, what does the police do? They enforce racial and class hierarchies to control who belongs where and under what circumstances. So the piece is really, again, are using knitting yarn, which is considered a craft element. You know, it's not quote unquote high art. I wanted to use that in a way to make these connections, to sort of visualize. One of my professors in art school once said something to me that really stood out. And he said, you know, some work illustrates theory and some work demonstrates it. And I think that in the last few years, that's what I've been striving to do. I've been striving to create work that demonstrate these social and political theories.
Yeah, and just going on the idea of people who are invisible, right? Or that we choose or just become accustomed to and don't see. I think what is really important to note is the number of homeless individuals that are not living on the streets, but in people's homes, couch surfing or hotels, and
or in
I
their
think,
vehicles even.
or in their vehicles, which you do show here on your the geometries of displacement, the RVs. You just see RVs lying in so many areas.
I mean, there was the same experience when I was living in Highland Park. You know, there was a part of Figueroa next to a park, and I would take my son for walks in the stroller, and I'd see sometimes 15, 16 RVs all lined up along the park, and it's people basically camping out in their RVs, and it really drilled into me how people are forced, right? Like how crazy it is that we live in a society where a few people can control a large percentage of the dwellings in an area. And if you don't have access to capital and to money, then screw you. You end up on the street. You end up living in your car.
So we go from one work that talks about, it's a chronological map or maps showing of the different displacements of the different peoples throughout the years. And then we're have this one last work that you created, this offering or altar. You want to share about this work?
Sure. This one I titled "An Offering to Our Tongva Relatives," because again, in my own work, in my own relationship to indigeneity as somebody of mixed indigenous and European ancestry, I've felt, even though I can say that my parents were immigrants and they came here for a better life, by virtue of doing that, I'm implicated in this settler colonial project. I'm still on Tongva land, on unceded, stolen Tongva land. So this particular piece was to acknowledge that throughout this process of work that I've been doing, I wanted to make an offering to our Tongva relatives, because I think part of this whole land back movement has been a real inspiration for me to think about my own relationship to the settler colonial project, but also to think about what those calls for land back mean, right? In a lot of ways, yes, it's about having indigenous sovereignty back, but the calls for land back are also calls to change. It's also an ecological imperative. It's also a question that let's change our relationship to the natural environment and stop treating the planet as something to create profit. And so the acorn becomes a symbol. The acorns are really important to not only Tongva, but to a lot of indigenous communities in California. They made bread, they made a sort of bread, they made stews, and in doing so, it was part of the reciprocal relationship to the land. They would take care of the land, and in turn, the land would provide sustenance. So the acorn was a way of, in my approach, at least, this non-appropriative way of referencing Tongva and indigenous history. Since I'm not Tongva, I'm not trying to speak for the experience of Tongva peoples, but as somebody from a different indigenous mixed background, I wanted to be in conversation with those ideas. And so I went for a hike in the Arroyo Seco trail near Pasadena and Highland Park, where the two meet. And I found an oak tree with acorns, and I was able to harvest them. So what you have here is a basket in the center of acorns that are harvested in an area that it's been very gentrified. And I created this pattern based on lino cuts that I converted into screen prints to make this design pattern and to make a sort of altar to this, to acknowledge that this show itself is taking place on indigenous land.
And on that note, with regards to acknowledging history, I'm gonna go on to William.
Mhm.
William, let's see, where is your work? We'll start with these two photographs, acknowledging history that is not visible, or covering up history that we choose not to, or individuals or certain groups refuse to acknowledge. Can you talk about these two works, where they are? I know your most of your work does take place in Santa Ana or Anaheim, where you are from, and then you have worked in other places as well. I know you just recently did a project, I think it was in downtown by the Japanese American Museum. We'll start with these two works.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, after coming back from living elsewhere, I think, I was really engaged with history of a place, and realizing that, you know, that I needed to find the history of my hometown as well. And I mean, I'm not a historian like Álvaro, but I kind of delved into these to the Anaheim Heritage Center, which holds a lot of archives of the city. Very small place, and you just told the archivist there to, bring anything out that that is about like native folks, Mexicanos, Black folks in Orange County. And I think, found out these kind of histories, and I realized that I had navigated those spaces as a child, you know, as a teenager. I mean, I used to skate, so I used to go out all around the city, and I played soccer as a you know, as a kid and a teenager, and realizing that that I was already like negotiating space, uh, as you know, as a teen and as a child in my city, and not knowing the kind of like impact that brown bodies were also going through, you know, previously before my place. You know, the one on the left is the the original, one of the original packing houses of Sunkist. And I'm standing there with a sign that says brown women used to pack oranges here. And when I did a lot of my research, I found you know, photographs. I found newspaper clips, and I used you know, some books from historians at UCI, Gilbert Gonzalez, and you know, saw that history, but I never saw it, you know, while, you know, being a public school kid in Anaheim. Um, so again, trying to centralize this, and it's so ironic that you know, some of these spaces like the packing house is now like a hyper gentrified. You know, I would say like it was never like the Grand Central Market before, but it's like a Grand Central Market now, which is like, you know, there's like $6 like paletas that get sold there. Um, you know, there's these kind of like boutique shops. But a place that I also don't even navigate right now because I'm like, you know, this is not what I kind of like remembered or even kind of thought about when I kind of would go around and try to skate these stairs. But then I realized that as you know, I sat on a commission in the city of Anaheim that, you know, this space was leased for $1 um, to these realtors that created this space, and realizing that, you know, those are also the kind of implications of gentrification, and especially in an area here where we did need, you know, a community center. We needed, uh, you know, we need stuff that kind of that serves the community, and not just folks that kind of come out and visit, or you know, the city was trying to do this thing where, you know, let's try to get people that went to Disneyland to actually also kind of come into the city and try to, you know, spend more money here, because Disneyland has a lot of tax incentives, and a lot of that money that is made from Disneyland is not paid back in taxes to the city. So, and I think, you know, navigating these spaces, you know, I saw folks commenting and you know, the museum that is in the city of Anaheim, and one of the board members of the museum there didn't really like the one on the left because they were the company that actually got a lease for $1. So, you know, and I think that's, you know, we're gonna, you know, constantly like people are not gonna like it, etc. And then also folks that say like, oh, you know, my city, you know, was a sundown town, etc. Was, you know, we had lemon groves like in Claremont and you know, kind of those cities around there. And on the right, you know, and along with the, you know, history that is Black, brown, and indigenous, a lot of that history is also kind of forgotten, but also not well documented. Because they only reference to, I mean, there's several references, but there's never kind of like documentation of this history on the picture on the right. Is that, you know, it was a oral history project that was recorded by a Cal State Fulton student that then was turned into an article at the OC Weekly, which is an alternative newspaper that doesn't exist anymore. That really kind of delved into some real history of the city, and in this oral history, you know, they interviewed a family that kind of that told, you know, the reporter that this park, which is called Pearson Park, was a segregated park, and the pool was segregated. You know, they cleaned out the pool of the public pool on Monday. On Monday night. So the only day that Mexicanos, Black folks, and indigenous folks would be able to go to a public pool was on Monday, because on Tuesday they got new water. Um, and that was the only kind of reference to the park being segregated. So I'm not even sure like which side of this park was segregated. And I think, that alludes to that, and that I have to kind of, show these sources where I found my facts. Because if I just stood there, who are the people that kind of like validate knowledge in institutions and in this Western capitalist society? Is mostly like white males. So I think, along with some of my exhibitions, people were like, well, how do you know it's true? So I have to kind of always deal with that kind of invalidation of knowledge. That is
Well,
always kind of,
yeah.
it's always like trying to be erased all the time. So.
And have you, when you're standing out there with the sign, do you get people asking you and engage in conversation, wanting to learn more, or do you get negative pushback?
I mean, I get a little bit of both. I mean, I've been threatened to, especially when it comes to like the history of the police in Anaheim and Santana. And some, especially like in the park on the right, there's a lot of teens that go around and skate, and they ask these questions and stuff. And I think that's kind of, that's something that I'm trying to also try to tackle is can we have to teach this in our schools. And that's the reason why I am working with the school districts in Anaheim.
Can you talk about this work? This area will gentrify soon. Where is this area?
Yeah, so it's right across another park that I used to play soccer at, and with this project called Origins and Displacements, I also wanted to look at kind of like past, present, and kind of quote unquote like future events or future histories.
Mhm.
Because there is also this technique that real estate agents and city planners had to use this kind of speculation, right? They speculate on land that's, they sit on land that's like 10, 15 years, because they know within those years this place is going to make them money. A place that I remember going to a lot as a kid, it was downtown Santana. And we didn't notice, but I think the gentrification process started in the late 80s, and that was by city planners, that was by the city council. They wanted to get rid of the Mexican bars there because they would create borracheras and stuff. But and we look at it now, there's way more places that have alcohol licenses in downtown Santana than there was back in the day, right? Back in the day, where it's like my dad would go get a drink, or go with his friends and grab a drink at a bar.
It's who's having the drink, right?
Yeah. And then coming back and seeing different cities in LA, here, Chicago, I noticed that there's these kind of aesthetics to places that seem that they're going to be gentrified soon, right? The construction site, the place, the park across that where I used to practice like twice a week is now like a dog park that has a statue of a police dog that got killed like a few years back. So it's super ironic, and it's super, and I try to play on those ideas of trying to use those same tactics they use to create work and kind of bring these a issue that's very universal to a lot of communities of color, Black, Brown, and Indigenous. And I think that's why I ended up having this conversation with Jonah and Álvaro about displacement, but also lived experiences, looking and self-reflection as well.
Before we move on to the other series that you created of portraits and like the individuals, can you talk a little more about what directed you to photography, to share these stories, untold stories. And then also, performance is not in this exhibition, but these are documentations of performances. So what led you to both performance and then documenting them as a photograph?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I was using these same systems or these same strategies that contemporary photographers use, and you know, when I saw the history of photography, I saw that Black photographers, brown photographers, indigenous photographers were using these same tactics, right? I'm thinking of, you know, I'm thinking of like Laura Aguilar, her series about, you know, success, access. I think I'm trying to forget the title, but
Yeah,
you know, she uses, yeah, she uses the same strategies to bring up these issues because our contemporaries were mostly like white male photographers. You know, we're making that work. They weren't politicizing that work, right? It was about kind of like nothing and abstract, avant-garde. Um, and photography has a very violent history as well. You know, with eugenics, with the beginning of photography is you know, they were using it to definitely separate and convince us that you know, we were inferior to white folks. And I think, you know, I'm always trying to kind of dismantle that history, but also show folks that we were, you know, we were making work at the same time as well. You know, not necessarily about nothing, but about ourselves, our experiences, and I mean, that's why I think Laura Aguilar is a huge inspiration, and I see her work quite a bit. And you know, we see that because of these institutional erasure of you know, BIPOC folks and art, like she didn't get her due diligence until after her death.
No, you're right. I think that her last show, which was at Vincent Price, that's when, you know, she started, people were acknowledging her work, and then when she passed, and yeah, definitely it was even more so after her death. So you've mentioned to me that this is a different series of a work of the people and like the day-to-day lives of people in Anaheim. Can you talk about this?
Yeah. So for my exhibition, I you know, I think the signage series is probably like a chapter, like it's a kind of introduction to a chapter of my work. And in between those signage works, I always include you know, something that I spent quite a bit doing. You know, I was a documentary photographer for 6-7 years, and I still always think that art and the way I work, that my praxis is always in cooperation with community, and you know, it's not just kind of like coming in and photographing and then leaving, and you know, not having those conversations with folks. And I think you know, these moments sometimes very banal, like the one on the right is like, you know, just, you know, someone watering plants, but it's you know, it's that aesthetic that we grew up in the working class environment. So you know, I decided to kind of include that as well. Like I love doing still lives, doing portraits, and I wanted to be that. I wanted to show that in part of the conversation too, because I don't show my face in the signage work as well, because I think it's like a placeholder for other folks. But again, I think I'm always trying to dismantle and you know, that canon that is in the history of photography. I mean, you'll never see like you know, you think about you know, the still lives of fruits and plants, and then you see my still lives here on the left. You know, it's
Yeah.
that's how, you know, that's how we grow. We're very resourceful. It's this idea of a rascachismo, you know, like making do with what you got.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be ashamed of that, right? I think
Or even the way the hose has been cut off.
yeah, no, yeah. I mean, and I think, I mean, when we look at Jonah's work, it's like he does it physically,
Yes.
and you know, I would, you know, I would go to his studio, and he, or like he'd be out in the in the back of the Claremont colleges, like looking to some of the trash that students left there, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like right assemblage work, rascachismo. It's a
Yeah.
very kind of like working class aesthetic, and I think because
Like
we
as someone that is a family of self-help graphics, Quetzal, he termed it very well, Raspachismo, as eternally resourceful. And I was like, that's a very elegant way of saying it.
yeah. So Jonah, you can add that to your
Yeah.
statement that yeah, rascuache artist too.
I'm writing it down right now.
So, which is a great segue to Jonah. And here we are. This is Rascuachismo at its best, right here. So when I look, when you talk to me about your work, they're basically, so with William, they're photo documentations of the everyday, and here with you, they're paintings and assemblages of found objects to create your environment that you grew up in, and you're to rebuild your memories. So I'm gonna start with actually this. I like this one. The first day of school.
First day of school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much most of these works kind of take place like in my neighborhood, Third Ward. So kind of to the right is the one with the wheel. This is kind of like outside the house of the room I'm in on the first day of school. And I'm just embracing those moments that I had inside this house. And this house was a house that I was actually displaced from as I was talking with Marvea and kind of figured that out. And I was just thinking about all the moments. Like sometimes I kind of see myself as a photographer. Like I didn't get a chance to take pictures of these moments, so I get to use my memory and paint those moments. So if I could have, I would have like photographed these moments or like probably set up like a self timer or something. But I'm able to like dive deep into my memory and recreate these moments.
And then
And then
this other, is this one the same house or second, the other house?
that's the other house. So yeah, most of my work is I'm kind of like in my work I have these two houses. I grew up with my father during the week and my mother on the weekends. So I bring both of these different lives I was living inside of my work, and I kind of like embraced both of those. The way I was living with my mom and the way I was living with my dad. And, living those two different lives, it allowed me to just bring in like so many different perspectives to my work. So I'm always like playing with perspective and playing with the way I can like put the basket this way, just giving it two different views. And
this is very much of the rascachismo that you actually did. You put the shopping carts on the walls to turn them into hoops, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's what me and my big brother, I'm about to call him my little brother, but my big brother, we would go find a shopping cart around the apartment complex, and then we would take our ball, hook it up to the gate, and then we would shoot hoops for a couple of hours, or as long as my mom told us. It's when my mom would tell us to come back inside. She would just send us outside and like, don't come back in the house.
Yeah.
The sun is down.
And then we have this work too. You have two of these. Can you talk more about this work?
Yeah, so this is actually going back to my father's house, and this is like a moment me and my dad used to have when we were doing laundry, and we would basically shoot our socks inside of the drawer. So that was kind of like a thing we would do, and we would make fun out of something that's kind of boring at times, doing laundry, folding clothes, and we would just shoot our socks. So I was trying to figure out a way I can like recreate that moment, and being that I was using found objects, like William said, I got this dresser from the backyard, from the backyard at CGU, and I was like, yeah, I want to make. I've always thought about making this, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna definitely get a chain and recreate that scene I had with me and my father from that room.
Yeah. I want to go back to this painting and obviously this assemblage, and for you to talk about where your grandparents' home was, and I mean the Third Ward is a very well-known neighborhood in Houston. I think especially after Rick, I'm sorry, I'm blanking
Oh, yeah,
on
Rick Lowe for
Lowe, his, the row house, the project row house. I think it started developing even more and more and shifting. So you want to talk about this experience of your family home being lost? I mean, it wasn't. It's not like your family lost the home, but in a way, it wasn't lost by choice, but kind of like not being able to keep, but at the same time, but not being able to keep it.
Right. Well, it was kind of like in between. It was also lost by just the sit. Well, it was really there. They made a decision to sell it, kind of like without me and my father really knowing. And just growing up in the neighborhood, the whole neighborhood is being gentrified. It's a predominantly Black neighborhood. It's a beautiful neighborhood. It's a bunch of nice houses. Being that I was in Houston last week, I actually got a chance to like pass by my old house, and you see how my father's like looking out the window that way, where the blue sky is.
Yeah.
They basically built that house up to where the blue sky is. That is, they added on to the house. So where the blue, if I was to like recreate it now, that blue sky wouldn't be there. It would be a whole.
So they expanded it.
Yeah, they expanded it. So it's a mansion. It's a huge mansion, and it's just crazy how the whole neighborhood is shifting. Well, they're trying to shift it. They're getting a pushback because some of the people in the neighborhood, they're trying to buy their land and trying to like get a hold of the neighborhood before it's lost completely.
Yeah. Is
And
that something that's very difficult to do? I mean, we're talking about again the idea of, are there policies in place, or is it much like Los Angeles, where it's becoming more difficult for long-time residents to be able to maintain their homes?
yes, that's exactly what it is. It's really hard to afford right now. And I think with my family, what they did was they saw it as an opportunity to make money. And I think that's what a lot of people are faced with. They're like, oh, we need the money, and they have to sell their land or sell their house. And the people are just basically capitalizing off of it, the owners. And being that Third Ward is like really close to like downtown, it's like it's a moneymaker.
I want to go back to your work and what pulled you into painting, and obviously you use a lot of found objects. So what has drawn you to these two mediums, primarily all of your work?
I think just it allowed me to have some freedom. It really, to me, I'm like a kid in like a candy store. I want to use everything pretty much, and I was like, I felt like I was able to tell my stories with actual material. Like William said, I'm actually cutting or using the material to tell these stories. And I felt like that was like a interesting way, being that I was looking at artists like John Outerbridge, Noah Peerfoy, um, dang, I always blank when I start thinking about artists. But being that I was looking at those artists, it was just, I was like, oh, I could do that too. And being that I didn't know it was called assemblage, me and my father, we would always call it rigging. And I was like, oh, this is the art term for something we've been doing like all our life. And I was like, okay, I can easily do this because I've been doing it all my life. I would take my toys and make things out of it, and now when I look back at it, I'm like, oh, that was art back in the day, but really didn't even know it. I just find it fun to do, to just kind of play around and bounce around between the different materials and
Was
different.
your father an artist as well? Is an artist, or is he like also, creative, but doesn't reference himself as an artist?
I think he is, because growing up, he was at his job. He would always do graphic design, but he would use paint. He would use the paint program, but he always make like landscapes off of the paint program. He'd have houses stacked up all on the paint. And he'd print it out and have it on the walls of his office. So I kind of like play with him and joke with him now, like you can really do something. If you can learn Photoshop, you can do something.
Can you talk a little more about, let me see the title here, the window pane. So I know this is the external view of, or the other angle of Rosewood and Delano, correct?
Correct. My dad he just called me. I had to deny him. Yes, so like if you were walking on the sidewalk that way, like going towards the hand, you would see the driveway of the other piece with the wheel.
Yeah.
And I kind of
And I know
missed your
you
question a little bit.
No, if you want to talk about this work, it is another take of that other of the painting that you have, but here you have the sign that says sold. If you want to talk about this some more.
Yeah. I think talking with you the other day, just kind of telling you the history of the piece. Now, when I look back at that sold sign, it kind of means something different to me. It kind of means like bye, like it's time for you guys to go. Because when they sold the house, it left me and my father basically homeless. And thankfully, I was in college, and my dad had to deal with it by himself, and it wasn't so much of a burden on him. But when I look at that sign, it's kind of like, yeah, you guys gotta go. You gotta find your way because we gotta sell this house.
And just
And the title.
Go ahead, please.
And the title is window pane, because now, like when my dad sees the piece, he instantly gets frustrated because he hates that the house was sold and it wasn't like done properly, and being that it could have stayed and he feels that pain. And I was just kind of playing with the two, like those are window panes, and seeing him kind of like reflect out the window, kind of how I drew him, I can tell like he's frustrated about having to leave.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for sharing. No, it was really great to really have that time to speak to you. I mean, I spoke to the three of you one-on-one to learn more about your work. And I want to thank you for sharing your work with us. And I do want to ask the three of you a question, given that you are individuals of people of color, and people of color usually don't have parents that are like, yes, mijo, you're going to be an artist, and that's going to mean a lot of money. It's not your typical profession that a lot of parents support. So can I get an insight of how your parents have seen your MFA graduation and your thesis and those conversations that you may be having? Or is it like, well, if it makes you happy, that's all good? Álvaro?
I mean, I think my parents have just learned to accept that this is the path that I've chosen for myself. As none of my parents were educated beyond middle school. So I felt like a good immigrant kid. Like I had to validate their experiences. And I remember when I was in college, I took an art class, my I think second to last semester, and I was like, damn, I chose a wrong major. Like this is what I really want to do. But I remember bringing it up to my mom, and she was like, what are you going to do with that? That's not a real job. And so I internalized that. I was like, well, yeah, I guess, mom's right. It's not a real job. And lo and behold, here I was in LA pursuing a PhD program. I was absolutely miserable. Why? Because I was doing what I thought I should be doing as a good immigrant kid, right? Like getting an education, being a respectable citizen, having this good job, and it took a big leap to leave that career path, and it hasn't been easy. It's still not easy, but I think my parents have embraced the fact that they just want to see me well and happy, and they see how this really feeds me emotionally, intellectually. So they accept it, but I think for my mom, it really wasn't real until I started being able to tell her like, hey, I paid my rent with my artwork this month. And that's when she was like, oh, okay, you're onto something. Okay, I see that. And then recently I was reviewed in LA Weekly, and I sent her an image, and she was like, oh, and I feel like it clicked in her head, like, okay, you're actually doing this, right? I think for her, as a concern, as somebody who grew up under financial precarity, she just wants me to be okay. She wants me to be able to provide for myself and for my son. So it's
Yeah.
definitely been a journey, and I feel like it is very common in immigrant communities to dissuade kids from being artists, because it's not, you don't get the prestige you get as a lawyer or as a doctor. It doesn't have that middle class respectability. But I'm grateful that my parents have been very supportive as of late.
William?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I'm the middle child, so I was more the rebellious one. I was like at 18, I was like, I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. But no, I mean, I went into Cal State Long Beach doing pre-med,
Wow.
and I didn't even show up the first day of school. And then I just ended up going through like community college, and I took photography in high school, and I realized like this is like one of the. I mean, for me, it was just kind of like a feeling of liberation, I think, and I think I ended up thinking that art is aid to liberation movements, and sadly, like we do have to like pay rent and use money to buy all these kind of like basic necessities. And again, too, I was like, I think when I was living away, I would call my parents once in a while, and the first thing my dad would ask is like, he was like, oh, like, do you need money or what? Like, I was like, no, I'm just calling to say what's up. I was like, no, I'm good. Like, because also, like they want, you know, my dad has told us many times, he's like, I don't, I've been working like, like since his entire, like since he was like 18.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want us to, he wants to have this kind of like betterment of this American dream. But he's also realizing that, you know, in a place like this, maybe education, like, he thought education was a way out of poverty, right? So he kind of like, they told us like, do that. But then realizing that like a lot of like first generation kids are also like in debt, like we're not gonna get out of debt in our lifetime, maybe. Um, and my brother's gonna be the one that's gonna be a doctor, so I think he took care of that. And my sister again is like, she's a social worker, so again, she's not making that much money, but I think we're like, they really want to see us happy, and they love going to the shows that I'm in. Sometimes like chismeando in Spanish, while folks can't like understand them. But I think again, it took them quite a bit to be like, oh, it's not a hobby, right? It's a way to make a living too.
And Jonah, I'm assuming from your conversation that through your father's side, through your father, you have some great support.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both of you. Really, my family is super supportive. It's so like soon in my career, like so early. Being that I just started like painting not too long ago, like 5 years ago. So that my parents are still like kind of like looking at it and like, wow, he's really living in California as an artist. And being that I just moved out here two years ago, and they're super surprised by like every little move I make, and they're super supportive behind everything. They see that I'm going back and forth from Houston for like different art events or different things, and they're just like, they can't really say anything. They know like the effort I'm putting into it, and I tell my mom all the time, like, if you don't hear from me, you know exactly what I'm doing because I'm making pictures for a living. So I got to give it my all to, to make that thing or, get what I'm, what I have in my head out. And she
Yeah,
supports.
Jonah and I hardly partied at all during grad school.
Yeah.
We were there super late.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to take this, I know we've gone over the time, it's already 8:17, but I do want to make some time, at least like maybe 2 minutes each of you, if you want to share on a current project you're working on, and as well as please share your social media handles so people in the audience can go see more of your work, and if they're interested also purchasing some of your work. So we'll start with William.
I'm mostly active on Instagram. It's like Billy the Camera. Also tomorrow is the launch of my solo exhibition. I mean, it's only online, but there's a publication that's going to be made out of it at the Latinx Project at NYU. And I'll be posting it on my social media. This is something I was going to do in New York, but now I'm just doing it online. But also, there's going to be some prints that we're going to work with Jonah and Álvaro in efforts to help mutual aid efforts in Orange County, LA, and other places. So yeah, check that out, and I'll be posting the link once it goes live tomorrow on that exhibition.
Repeat your social media handle one more time.
Yeah, it's at Billy the Camera.
Great. Jonah?
And my Instagram is at jonah.elijah. So it's basically my name and just appeared in the middle of it. Upcoming projects. Right now, I'm currently assisting Michael Massenberg, doing a few murals with him. And I've been thinking about doing a performance, taking a stab at doing a performance. I don't want to give too much away because I haven't like solidified it yet, but I say just follow me on my Instagram to just keep track to see if I do it. But
well, good luck. And well, you have a good critic right here with William.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And one more time for your social media handle.
Oh yeah, Jonah.Elijah.
Great. Y Álvaro.
Yeah, so like William said, one thing that I'm looking forward to is we're going to have a little print activation later this month where we're going to be raising money for different mutual aid efforts. One of the organizations that I wanted to plug in is called Mountain House LA. They're on Instagram. I'm trying to help them raise money. The person running it is doing really great work, providing direct relief to people who are unhoused. And the money goes directly to help get tents and different things that mitigate sort of the violence of living on the streets. My Instagram handle is at Álvaro D. Márquez. And my website it's pretty simple. It's www.alvarodmarquez.com if anybody cares to support the artwork. An upcoming project that I have is actually starting this Friday. I'm going to be an artist in residence at the El Segundo Museum of Art near LAX. I'll be living on site in a small apartment in the museum that has a studio space. And I'll be creating a site-specific installation that expands on geometries of displacement, but adds a little bit about the history of El Segundo, both as an artist colony in the 70s and 60s, but also as a site where indigenous peoples will go to the ocean to procure food. So I'll be expanding on that work and living on site for 10 weeks. And I'm really excited about that.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, three.
Thank you.
For being here today and for sharing so much about your work. Recognizing that Boyle Heights and East Los Angeles are the epicenter of COVID in LA County, it's very difficult that we're not going to be able to open our doors for the exhibition if something if there's a change in the next month. I hope that we can, and we will definitely announce it. But please keep an eye out when we promote the activation, the live printing activation, and we'll provide more information about that as it comes along. So I want to invite everyone again to visit our website at selfhelpgraphics.com/intersections to see the exhibition and more information about the individual artist's thesis and their artwork, and then scroll at the bottom to learn more about the artist's biography, as well as the price list of the works in the exhibition. And also to support our ongoing programs in our organization, you're also welcome to donate to Self-Help Graphics through our website or social media. And in closing, I want to share that, I think we are all scared for what may come or will be allowed to happen in the coming days, especially on January 20th. But I remind myself of the resilience of people, communities, movements, our artists, organizations that help us move forward. History, as far back as 2020, which seems like decades ago, demonstrates that we're making strides. And the people of Georgia showed us that in last week as well. And I think that the effects, the events at the Capitol just unfortunately overshadowed that. So we say goodnight with a conviction that with the power of creativity and unity, we will continue writing new stories and that are told and written by the nation's diverse voices. The normal we once knew no longer serves us. We'll see you.